Welcome guys to this second session on GCP, and this time we'll be dealing with the settings, the service account, the startup scripts, and the networking part. I mean, these are some of the things you really need to understand about the compute engine. Otherwise, you find yourself being charged a lot on stuff you really shouldn't be getting charged on. And also it kind of improves your efficiency when you are working in GCP, specifically the compute engine part. Because I think one of the bigger issues with most people is when you are coming to the cloud, you're coming from working with stuff like you have been working on an on-premises server, or you try to host your own stuff on your desktop or something. So basically, one of the things you will come to cloud computing knowing will be virtual machines. So well, they are also a big part of GCP. As much as there are other offerings, they are also very core to how GCP works. So yeah. So like I was saying last time, we did a lot of introduction of what VMs are, how they served, how you create yours in GCP, and why you should actually do that, how you can actually manage costs. And you can check that up. I shared a link to the YouTube channel because that was recorded, and I think a blog will be coming in the next 1 week or two. I have it written. I haven't just configured it to go live. I mean, I need some pictures and all that, but otherwise it's already written, so that I'll get to share. Then, so for this day, we will be talking about the VM settings. Now, these are the tiny little things that makes a VM work for you. So one of the bigger things we need to talk about when you think about GCP will be the GCP regions and the zones. And in this case, when I talk about a region will be an independent geographical location where you host your resources. This is not a single data center. It's like a region. If you say it's US Central 1, it's like the entire of Iowa. If you say it's Europe, the entire of London, that's what you are thinking about uh, geographical location. Because in that geographical location, say Iowa or London, there might be several data centers, but they are all connected as a single region through the networks. Then each region will consist at least 3 or more zones, and we'll say what a zone is. And one of the bigger key things you need to understand when you are when you are actually selecting the zones for your data, when you will come to create a virtual machine, is one of the bigger things is you get very low network latency between zones that are in the same region. Like if you are in US Central 1, and then you get US Central 1A and US Central 1B, the connectivity there, the network latency is so much higher. It's so low like this. The network is very fast as compared to having a region that is US Central 1A and London, and we call it Europe. Europe Central. We'll check that, but yeah, like a Europe zone. So, and regions usually are like 160 kilometers apart. That's what this is usually for redundancy's sake, because let's assume there is a failure in an entire region. Say there is a hurricane that hits Iowa, the data centers are offline. So that region is that entire region comes offline. Then you need at least there is that redundancy that in 160 kilometers radius away from that one, there is another region that can take up the road that was in that region. So that's how GCP, Google, like organizes their regions. Then in that region, we see they have like 3 or more zones, and that zone is like a logically abstracted area where you deploy your resources. Well, you could think of a zone as a single data center, but that's not necessarily the case. That's why it's a logical abstracted area, not a physically abstracted area. So some zones might be a single data center, but also a single zone can span different data centers. Like you see, they can say like in Ladan there might be 2, 3 data centers, but they are all in the same zone instead of being in the same region. So there's that differentiation that you need to understand about a zone. So for ease of understanding, you might think of it as a single data center, but it's not a single data center. It's a logical abstraction of this. There might be one data center or several data centers that are interconnected together to be one zone. Then each zone is hosted in one or more cluster. Okay, like if you're in, like and this is the interesting thing about zones. If we are two different organizations and our virtual machine sits on US Central 1A, your US Central 1A for your organization might not be mapping to the same cluster as my US Central 1A. So that's what's usually interesting about zones. We'll check the map here right now as we try to create a virtual machine. And now this map, this is kind of the updated map. I think they are gonna update that in the cloud next, which is starting at I think September 12th. I hope you guys have logged into that. It's usually interesting to see what Google has to offer, what they are doing. Yeah, so Cloud Next is starting, I think, on 12th of it is 12th and 13th of September. Please be sure to join in because you get to try nice labs, and if you win those labs, you get credits to use on your Google Cloud. So, well, there is a plus to that. So this is the what we are talking about, the GCP zones. I mean, and you can see these are in our African case. You see like that's why our friends from Nigeria, they have a very good connection with Google because there's literally a subsea cable that's connecting Google data centers to edge of presence in Nigeria and also connects it to the South Africa. And for Kenya, we have like a subsea network also that we are connected. That's why you find like in Kenya and Nigeria and South Africa, there's high latency between you and your and Google products. So it's because of that network. They are investing every single day. So we don't know how this map will be by the next year, especially with COVID, where everybody has just gone online. They are starting others up here in Canada. You see Canada is kind of empty. They have like two that are coming from Canada, and of course there's Russia, which Russia and Africa, which, well, we will know that in the next few years. But also this is what I wanted to talk to you about when you talk about GCP regions. And you guys can ask me any question. By the way, this is a conversation. This is not me teaching. So so you can see how the architecture is laid out of how the zones interact. So when you are in Africa, let's say you are in Kenya, and you are very sure you want your audiences in Africa, well, it might actually be easier and like in terms of network and stuff to host your application in London instead of hosting it in the US. Are we in agreement, or anybody can interject with that? You guys might be have had more interaction with it, but okay. So for me personally, most of my sites are global, so I kind of set them up in the US Central one, which is also the default for most people. But then for most people, you will never actually notice the latency until you have a heavy network site, and then you see the costs creep up because the cost for network egress and it kind of tends to be high. So if you might find that a data center in London is expensive in terms of a VM being created here, but it's cheaper in terms of the network, especially if your audience is around Kenya or Africa in general. So those are some of the considerations you need to understand when you are choosing regions and zones. And we'll check that up in a whole new talk we'll have about networks, because networks is a whole different story, how these things are connected together and what you should be checking out for in terms of security and all that. So that's what some of the things we need to think about when you are doing a GCP zone. And these are the things you think about when you choose it. You need to think about network latency. You need also to think about the type of resource you have, because again, not all GCP resources are available in every region. And you see some, like some new stuff they want to introduce, they introduce it maybe in central US Central 1, and then it's not available in any other data center. So you have to keep checking up those. That's why they have a blog. You need to be checking out which of the things you want to do are supported in which the zone and I mean and region. So yeah, you need to think about the type of resource you have, like, and then you need also to think about how you'll handle your failures. Do you wanna, if you wanna create a virtual machine, and where will the redundant data be taken to? Like, what if that zone you have put in your VM fails? What will you do? Will your application just go offline, and then you don't have I mean, like, especially if it's a mission critical application, what are you gonna do? So yeah, those are some of the questions you need to be answering before you start to think about creating a virtual machine and all that. So these are the resources I'm talking about. Like, the resources in GCP are divided into three. There is global resources, there is regional resources, and then there is zonal resources. Like, the global resources is like the network. You see, like when you create a network, even especially even the default network, it exists in all the zones of that GCP is part of. And then firewalls, again, they are global. And then there is the disk images that you will use to I mean, people will call it disk images, but for you we kind of understand them as OS images in reality. So yeah, they are global, like, so. And then the regional ones, like sub networks, the persistent disks, the regional ones, and then the managed group. Like, you can have a group of VM, like kind of a template that are regional. So if one zone fails, you can still be up and running because there's another zone where this data is. Then there's the zonal ones. This is the thing about virtual machines. Virtual machines are inherently zonal. So that's why when you are going to create a virtual machine, you usually will select a region and a zone. While for others, you don't actually do that. There's then there's the VMs they are very zonal, and that's why you need always to think about persistent disks, redundancy when you are creating virtual machines. Otherwise, you might have your application run offline, and especially if you use a virtual machine that doesn't have a service level agreement, like the shared ones, like the one micro and all that. That's why Google will always recommend that you start with a VM that is supported by SLAs with Google. Then there's the machine types that we saw last time, where you will be able to. These are zonal, and then there's the tensor processing units like the GPUs. Those are all zonal. So when you choose to work with virtual machines, you need to think about that. That's one of the bigger limitations of having to use VMs, because they are very zonal. So this is the other part you need to think about when you're working with virtual machines. The boot images. These are the OS images that you run on your VM. They are like divided into three. There's into two. There's the public ones that we use. These are globally maintained by either Google, any open source community, or third party vendors. Like Microsoft has their Windows, then there's Linux, there's Ubuntu, there's Debian. All those are the public images. These are available globally, so wherever region you choose, it will be there. Then there is the custom ones. This you create yourself. You might be coming from getting, like, you see how you back up your machine and you can restore your machine from an image you created. you can bring in that image to GCP and be able to boot that image in your virtual environment. So if you have a really nice working application that is bundled in a machine that you have, you can bundle that up as a boot image, and you just bring it into GCP and it will run. So that's the good thing about that this, like the public ones, are updated like monthly. Google updates this monthly so that they make sure you don't have a problem with your data. So, so some of the things that you need to understand again about virtual machines is actually how to make them, because you can see here I have a code here, and I think this is what where most learners are having a problem. They keep saying that they cannot understand the commands. The Google commands kind of, once you use more and more, you realize they are kind of easy to understand. Because like this one, we are talking about G Cloud, that's Google Cloud. Then compute is what we have been talking about, and then images, like these are boot images and then list. So if I come into my console, this one I'm gonna be using just my own. I have Cloud SDK on my PC. So if I come here and do G Cloud Compute image lists, you can see how many images I have. Well, there's a lot. You see. These are all public images Google has. Like you can see there's Debian, there's CentOS. So you decide which of these you wanna use to learn your virtual machines. So remember that, like, and again, any deprecated image that you might know, Google doesn't. The default is to make sure that you don't. They don't support the deprecated version of the OS. So you have to bring it in yourself as a. You have to select it. I think we are going there right now. So this is a code to create a virtual machine using code URL. Then the other part, let's check it out now, is the startup scripts. So if we come here to our virtual machine, let's actually try to do our virtual machine again. If you come here and try to create a virtual machine in GCP, I think it's easier to talk about it when you can see what we are talking about. We talked about all this. This is where you decide your boot image. So if you came here and hit on change, you can decide on which operating system to use. You see, these are all the operating system, and I said they are the. Okay, Karimot, let me zoom in. That's better. Okay. So yeah, so these are all the operating systems that are support. These are public, like these are all that this we and then. But if you are using Windows, like if you use Windows, it will cost you like the normal. It will cost you the normal way of, like the way you buy Windows. It will also cost you that way here. You can see all the, if you guys use Windows as your operating system on your server, these are some of the versions that are supported here. And then you can see, even if you use Ubuntu, you can use that. As much as Google gives you this as the default, the Debian, you can just come in here and change to whichever version of image you are comfortable in. Because I think most of us, like if you have worked so much with this, most people have always came in here and just used Ubuntu. That's what people know to be to be really honest. So if you gonna be comfortable using Ubuntu, just go ahead and use it. It might have something that the Debian doesn't, which in reality not really. But yeah, that's how you that's where you choose your image. Then the other part we were talking about, I came here because of this stuff we are calling startup scripts. You see the virtual startup. You see, like I wanna test this with you guys. Remember when we host our applications? Maybe your application is running on Apache, the Tomcat. So you wanna run those scripts when you are creating the virtual machine. So how do you make sure that happens? And especially when you create a custom image that you're gonna come in and bring it to GCP, you need to be able to learn startup scripts that you can use to startup scripts to use in your GCP. So this is where you come in, and the other we have talked a lot about all these parts. So this part here, there's after firewall, there's two drop arrows that are called that has management, security, disks, networking, and salt tenancy. So if you click on that, you can come here under management. You can see there's startup scripts. So if I came here and just added those scripts there, when I create this application, this when I create this virtual machine, it will first of all update the Linux kernel, and then it will install Apache and PHP. And the string yes is to just to make sure it doesn't ask you for that yes or no confirmation. And then it will restart the Apache. That's how generally you create your virtual machine normally. So this is very important. It may not look like so because you think if I create my instance, then I can always go back and add this. And we can try to do this. So so combining all that we have learned, I want us to do an experiment here. I want you guys to help me. We have talked so much about working on cost and all that. So I want to create an instance here. I know I'll delete it. So I'll call it like GCP mentorship. So this is where we start playing with it. So we decided which zone do you guys want me to use? Yes. Let me answer a few questions as you guys decide to tell me which zone to use. Daniel has said we use US Central 1F. So we keep checking how much it costs us. So the next thing we said we need to check on is the series and the machine type, isn't it? And Barrel Chebet, yes, it's possible to add the startup script after you have created the VM. You just SSH into the VM and just do the normal way you do sudo apt install sudo apt. But this time you say we kind of want to use startup script so that this is usually when you are running there's a group of an instance group. There's something we call an instance group where you learn virtual machines, like different virtual machines, learning the same application at the same time to be able to handle the load that is coming to your application. So if you can't be able to be going into these instance groups and updating each application after it has been every VM that after it has been created with the startup script. So what you need is to actually create an image that has startup script baked into it, so that once it starts up and does all the configurations itself and launch your application. That's why it's quite important to have the startup script and to be able to actually to master them. You need to actually always figure out which, like especially if you are running Python, like a virtual machine, not like a virtual environment, you'll be able to like define the requirements. So those requirements are the ones this kind of the same that you need to understand to put in your VM when you are creating it. Let's use a zone in Europe. Let's do this. I think Europe is one I wanted. We want to use the London one, and then London, like say Europe 2B. You see how much the costs increase because you're using. I mean, it's a tax issue in the UK. So yeah. Aha. So next, let's use the series. So we want to use the cheapest series. So if I came here in machine type and use the micro to get me to $9, but if I come in here and choose the first generation and choose the micro, it gives me like $6. Okay, so this you need to be able to play with this very easily. So we in agreement we create an N1 and F1. Yeah, so yeah, we create that. So the next one a change we would make is change from Debian to something like Ubuntu. Let's actually do that to see you don't have to always learn with Debian. So you come in here, I hope you have seen where I have touched. You come in here, there's something called boot disk. So you come in here and change, and when you change you decide if you have a custom image. I currently don't have. I think I deleted it from this project that I'm working, but I had a custom image, and you see that in action in the coming weeks. How you actually make a managed group instance and how to deal with that. And then snapshots, and that we will look at that, but we will use per break. We change this to an Ubuntu, and then uh 20. I usually use the I will always use the current one. So yeah, for me, Daniel, most of the time I always play with the cost of the VM to know which one is cheaper for me. And the interesting thing is US Central one will always be cheap. I don't know why. Like that one I cannot answer. But it's usually a tax issue. Like one of the most expensive ones is actually the ones from Tokyo. They and then there's one from Germany. The cost is it goes very high very fast. But it's a tax issue, it's a government kind of issue. So this is how we now the other part that we were talking about is a persistent disk. A persistent disk, you see, we you can select a disk of any size, like for where the your OS is. So I think we'll talk about disks later because I think there's something different. We'll talk about disks when we come to deal with instance groups. It will be easier to explain that than now. So this is how we have done it. So we have an Ubuntu 20.04 LTS, and then we say okay. We don't want to enable confidential, and we don't want to deploy containers to this VM. This is the other part I was telling you about. Like you can have one virtual instance, and then you can configure it yourself. You can say this VM will be running uh, containers, and then with that you can be able to run your own Docker instance inside your VM. So I mean, something you have to play with, but I kind of don't like doing that. If I want to use Docker, I want to go to Kubernetes than here, but it's possible if you want to manage this yourself. Remember, for VMs, you actually managing everything yourself, including the management. It's like you are just renting a server. So this is the other thing you need to understand. This is a whole topic on its own. This part here that looks so small, identity and API access, we talk about that. So this one is a service account is kind of a Google internal service account, the Google Cloud internal account that that is used to access internal APIs. You know, all these things are APIs, the VMs, they are all being powered by API. So you need to like this one we are using. For you to create a VM, you need a compute engine default service account. so that I can learn compute engine. And there is more. You can create yours. You can. I see, like for my project, I have like three. I have I have one for app engine, and I have one for Firebase, and then I have one for compute engine. So you will create these things, especially when you are working with Crowd SQL. You will always need a service account to access that part. Conventional VM is whereby everything is encrypted, like even during processing, your data is encrypted. Well, it's even on the in the CPU. Google's default is everything in your virtual machine, everything in your storage is usually encrypted at rest. But when you start processing it, it has to be decrypted so that it can be processed. But in confidential VMs, even that data that is being decrypted to be put into the CPU for processing is still encrypted. That's what how confidential VM service work. The other part we needed to talk about is the firewalls. By default, you would want to allow HTTP traffic. That means data to be you can lead and light like it can access the internet, can access your VM, and the VM can access the internet. Then so we talk about that. We you can also prevent your VM from being deleted. I don't want to do that because I'm gonna delete mine after we do this. I have a startup script. I want to learn an update. I want to install Apache and PHP, and I want to do restart the service. For metadata, this is where we add a startup and a shutdown script. This issue usually, I mean, I think the next time I'll have written something here, but this is a set of commands of what should happen should the application, the VM get stopped. What should happen? That's where you put it in here in the metadata. So you have mostly have a startup script and a shutdown script, because mostly let's assume your VM is processing some data. You need to tell it precisely what should happen when it's shutting down. Otherwise, you lose your data in your processing. So that's why the metadata is here. So there's Matthew was asking where how you set preemptibility. This is where you do it. It's still under management. So when you scroll down there, you get preemptibility where you just turn it on. You can actually, in this case, I can just turn it on. So this will only last 24 hours. This usually use this for batch processing. You wanna annotate a lot of images and then just be done with it. Like say you have a script to do that. So this is how you would want to run it. And then after 24 hours or anytime there is demand in the system, you stop getting charged for it. And it's really cheap. When you use preemptibility, it can learn to, like, you see how it reduced, and you have not learned anything. Just by turning on preemptibility, we came from $6 to $4. But the preemptibility one, you don't want to be using that when you want to use your VM for your website, because do you want your website to go off sometimes? So yeah, and there's this part where you decide whether you should automatically restart your application or not. So we have talked about a lot about this machine, this type here. I have talked about management. We won't touch about security, not yet, until we do networking, even disks. Like here, this is where you decide whether you want to delete the boot disk after you delete the application or not. Mostly by default, you need to you delete the boot disk when you delete the application, which for me is what I want. And how I want it named, I want it named based on my instance name. You can create a custom name for your disk, mostly especially when you want the disk to be used for an managed instance group, you change the name. So that's how you do it. And then on networking part, this is a whole section we will talk about. I am actually not gonna talk about it at all right now, but this is the next week's talk. We'll start with networking a little bit, introduction, and then we can talk about network tags and firewall tags. And then sole tenancy, this is where you want to know specifically where your VM is. We don't want to do that here because I mean most of the time I feel like this is a government thing. They know where their data center is. They know which server their application is running on, just for due diligence in terms of when something comes up. So, and with that, we can create our application. But before we do that, I can show you two ways of doing it. We said we're gonna, if I hit this, I would have created this application using my crowd console. But if I come here to the command line, this is the code I would like to do all that I have done on the and create this VM using the command line. So if I came here and just to call this, and I came and learned it on my crowd shell here. So if I came and learned it in crowd shell, it would work. It will create for me this machine we have created. And I think from next week we will start talking about how to write these codes, because I think they have been disturbing a lot of people. And I'll show you how it's easy to actually master them. So if I hit create, it will create for me a virtual machine. I want to us to SSH into it and see. So while it creates, let's go back to our presentation, and you guys can ask me any question as we wait for it to create. So we have talked about all this, like global infrastructure between this and the service account is an internal account to interact with GCP resources, and then the network is the global software controlled network. Actually, GCP network is software controlled, and apparently it's the largest of its kind in the world, because imagine how many services you are using right now that are Google's services. It's that big. And then we talked about firewalls, like that one you have seen me create. It has allowed my VM to be accessed via the internet and to access the internet itself. So as that creates, last week we had somebody who asked the study order for the courses, how they should study these courses. And for me, this is what I've worked. And and to be really honest, you guys have to understand this. Like, at this juncture, if you actually take all these courses, you can be able to do an associate cloud engineer examination if you master all this. And this is the same courses that and I think you have access to them even now, even before going to the next zone. It's to the next, I think. I don't know, maybe mine, I have access to all this, but these are the lines. I don't know whether I should share this on the other group, but yeah, this is how the order to which to study this for this examination. I hope we're good. Any questions so far? So let's check if our virtual machine has finished creating. And there we are. So we have, you see, I have an internal external IP address, and internal IP address. These are some of the things we talk by, and you see it has been created. So if I SSH into these, let's hope it's big enough. As a yes and no. Okay, you can see we have an Apache Learning, and remember this, we installed the Apache service using a startup script. So basically, if you are running, I'm talking this especially to people who have been working with, like, you actually work with a server. So you install or you put all this list. Okay. So this, you can see now the startup script worked. So for now, that's what I wanted to show. But before we go, let's answer some. Let me answer some questions here. Okay. So this is what you'll be checking in next week. So next week we'll talk about this, creating a virtual machine again, but then we will host a Python application in the virtual machine, talk about its security and the best practice, and actually I'll give you a link to access the application for the few minutes we'll be working in the presentation, and then how to protect your application from access to the from the internet, but you can only access it via the Google network and not through the internet. So this is what we'll be doing through. And as I answer the questions, you guys can check these resources. I think I should share them on the link. Let me see. Okay, resources. I hope the Udemy course is free. You guys can check that out, but not a must. But this is the next link for from Pluralsight is the courses how you should handle them. So getting back to people who have asked question, other when you're running the course, does someone need to remember all the SSH code? Yes and no. So if you are working on an application, say like you want to host a website using Apache, you will need to know how to actually use Apache on any normal server platform. So that's the code you need to understand to know. But what you should remember is the other codes that you have been seeing in your application. Let me return you back to some like this, like gcloud compute image list. Those ones comes even in the exam, so you need to understand them. And next week, like we said, I will try to break down how you identify how these things are, because they are easy for Google. Because like if you want to know to see the list of images in Google has, you need to go gcloud compute images list. I'll give you a write-up on that. But yeah, so you will need to remember some of this code. If they are Google Cloud specific, you actually need to remember how to write them. Not the code itself, but how to do it. Because once you start understanding how to do it, like if you are using compute, like if you are using deployment manager, uh you could just do like gcloud deployment. Okay. uh-huh Chebet asks, when do you use sh, and when do you use cloud shell? Well, cloud shell, you use cloud shell to access the entire Google resources. You can access even like all. Let me just share these. We were here. So all these things you can see here, all these products that you can see here, you can access them via the cloud shell, the cloud shell. But SSH is specific to a specific virtual machine. So if I create a virtual machine here, another one, I can SSH into it. Now, the trick here is you can SSH to this VM from the cloud shell. I don't know how easy to explain that, but just understand that SSHing via this to this virtual machine, uh, you are only accessing the resources that are within that virtual machine, or the other ones that you have told the service API, or rather the service account that has created this virtual machine, whatever else you have allowed it to access. But using this cloud shell, you access the entire Google Cloud infrastructure using your Cloud Shell. It comes with, it's like what you can see from mine. I have installed, because I'm using Windows, I have installed a Cloud SDK on my computer. so that I can be able to access the entire Google network on my computer for my work. So that's the difference. Then Karimot asks, I didn't get how you checked the Apache and what is it for. Okay, Apache, that one should not worry you too much. Apache is like, okay, who can I, let me get somebody to explain better than I can. Gary, maybe you can pick up like what Apache is, because what's the easiest way I can explain? Like maybe give it a go.
Okay. Yes, I don't use Apache, but so Apache is what you call a web server. So it's the program that takes up your website, its configurations, and presents that to the browser. I think that's the basic idea. So Apache is a web server. It's like any other application you run on your computer.
Yes. Yeah, so I hope Daniel and Karimot, that has been answered. Yes, Naren?
Okay, I just want to buttress what the first person said about Apache.
Yeah.
Just to add local into it instead of you hosting it globally, that you are having a web server on your personal PC, on your personal system. Before hosting it outside, you want to stimulate and see the behavior, how it look like on your system locally.
Yep.
So Apache gives you that privilege to be able to see what you want to transmit outside internally.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So okay, I hope that has answered you guys, Daniel and Karimot. Yeah, because it's just a web server, really. Like me personally, because I work so much with Python and maybe Django comes with it, like a running server on its own, just a tiny assist. So yeah, that's what it is. So any other question before we cross? I really hope guys you guys have had a good session. Yeah. So I will talk to you like be soon. I will be able we will be able to talk about how to actually create something like this, like how my site works, like taking all this and hosting it in Google Cloud in simple steps. So yeah, this kind of what we are going through, and I'll be working with Python, but don't feel intimidated with that because like I usually see, you don't really shouldn't worry about your programming language. It's just a way to tell computers what to do. So yes, so this one of the ways. At the end of the day, we'll be able to do this. But next week, I'll be able to host something in a virtual machine, and then we can talk about that. So unless there's any question on at this meeting, and really it has been nice meeting every one of you. Okay, thanks guys. It has been nice to meet you. Like if you missed the other week's talk, it's there on my YouTube channel. Actually, like it, subscribe to it. I mean, there will be a lot coming in there. I also do other things. Like I said, I work in data science space, so I'll keep sharing about stuff there. So it will go beyond this program. So you guys, nice to meet you and bye.